Hi everybody, I'm Jody Peel, Executive Director of Third Space Charity, and this is Third Space Live pre-show. Today's going to be a big day and a tough day in terms of what we're going to be talking about. But before we jump into the show, I just want to remind you that you can learn all about our charity and our programs and services on our website at thirdspacecanada.org. You can also sign up for our newsletter to stay in touch, and you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We also have a new YouTube channel, and we're populating it with all these shows that we're... Oh, I'm going to turn off these questions. There we go. Not that skilled yet at this, everybody. We'll get there. Yeah, you can take a peek at our YouTube channel, and that's where we're going to be sharing all of the recordings of these shows. So it usually takes a couple days after the show goes live, but stay in touch and check out all the other topics we've already addressed. We're still new at this, so keep your ideas for topics and formats and any other comments you might have coming. You can address them directly to me at jody@thirdspacecanada.org. Now wait a sec, I gotta turn this off here. Sorry, I can't do two things at once. I'm just gonna let it go and see what happens. Okay, in a few minutes, I'm gonna be introducing Deanne Leung, who is our guest today, and she's gonna be talking about grief. But before I do that, I want to do what I always do, and no, I have to turn this off. You know why? Because, there we go. Okay, now I'm not distracted. Thanks for bearing with me. Yes, for those of you who watch this show regularly, I always give a shout out to Third Space Coffee, located here in Landmark District in Kelowna, British Columbia, because they're a social enterprise and they support our charity, and they're great people, and they're doing really cool things right now during this pandemic to support frontline workers in town. So shout out to Lonnie and Jocelyn. You're doing an amazing job. And a reminder that the Landmark District is currently sponsoring 25% off purchases for Landmark businesses, and you can use the code LandmarkLove by ordering online at thirdspacecoffee.ca, or if you go in person, we've created a safe system, so if you come in, you can verbally use that code LandmarkLove. And be sure to say hi and thank you to Lonnie and Jocelyn. Now, my gratitude practice is something else I do before every show, and today it's a heavy practice. I'm going to be sending out a message of gratitude to all the people supporting the individuals, the families, and the communities that have been traumatized and are grieving from the horrendous mass shooting that occurred in Nova Scotia on April 18th. Look at me, already starting to, I've got my tissues ready for today's talk. Two friends of mine here in Kelowna have been directly impacted, so I want to send them love and prayers, and also to the husband and children of their late friend, Constable Heidi Stevenson, as well as their brother Daniel, who lives in that community, and only by God's grace was his family spared. I also want to send love and prayers to the entire community that has been devastated by this tragedy. So with that said, I think we should move into the talk. I do want to invite you to also get some tissues ready, and this is the first time on the show that we're going to be inviting you to do a little activity during the show. So grab a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, and once Deanne joins us, we'll tell you what to do with that. So now I'm going to start the live portion of the show. So hi, I'm Jody Peel, Executive Director of Third Space Live. Today is April 23rd, and this is show number 9 on grief. This show offers conversations, ideas, and stories to build a mentally healthy community. Learn more about us at thirdspacecanada.org, or follow us on Facebook and Instagram or YouTube. Our guest today is Deanne Leung. She's been on our show before, and she'll be on our show again. She is a therapist with Stepping Stones Counseling Group here in Kelowna. She's also has a particular professional interest in grief. Deanne is a therapist as well as the clinical coordinator at the Stepping Stones Group, and her private practice focuses on individual and family therapy. She practices in the area of trauma, attachment, and grief amongst others, as well as, of course, anxiety, depression. And her group also has a specialization in autism spectrum disorder. She uses different models of during her therapy, including play and expressive therapies. She's very well known in this community. I'm going to add her here and get her to join us. She's very well known in this community, as is her therapy dog, Murphy. And I think she might be introducing her new puppy, Gracie, in the show, at the beginning of the show today. He is going to be a therapy dog once he's ready to do that. So once she joins us, we will start the show. I see that Instagram is trying to connect her. Maybe she's trying to get Gracie together. There she goes. Oh, I need some happy, look at, hi,
there we go. Hi guys. Oh,
hi,
I've been sitting listening with her, trying to keep her occupied while we've been waiting, just because I wanted you to see her before we have a more serious chat.
Yes, I'm sorry. I can't look at, she's rambunctious.
Yes, she's a pupper.
We might see her later, or she might be barking or something.
Yeah, you might hear, and I have another dog here too. So yeah, you might hear the occasional disruption by a canine friend, but we're okay with that.
Yeah. Oh, well, congratulations again, and welcome, Gracie.
All right.
She's destined to be a star, just like Murphy.
She really has some great traits for therapy, so I'm excited to see her progress in her work. But she can be a puppy for now, no pressure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm okay. I already started crying, so
yeah.
I cried with you earlier today already when we were doing the pre-show prep. So
yeah, it's a heavy time, right?
Yeah,
it's a heavy time, and we're going to kind of explore that a little bit and make some room for it, because I think we've all been coping as best we can, but we've been doing it at a very busy pace, right?
Yeah, and I think I realized that it's all coming out now. I've been stuffing it down.
Yeah.
And it's all coming out. So I know that you wanted to do something a little different at the beginning today.
I did.
Why don't I let you do that?
And I just wanted to acknowledge that this is a tricky topic. It has many layers for people, and that we're all going through our own individual experience at the same time we're going through a collective experience. And I think I want to be gentle with that. I want to go slow with that, because I know that I tend to talk pretty fast sometimes when I get excited about things. And I just want to create a container around that too, Jody, because I think that this conversation could certainly open things up for people. And I don't want people to leave this conversation feeling raw or feeling exposed. So I thought I would just go slowly and do some of the things that I practice with people when we talk about grief, and when I meet with other therapists, or I do trainings on grief, as I always like to build kind of some ritual into it as well. So one of the things I like to do is I like to light a candle. So I brought one because I like to acknowledge all of my teachers, all of the people who've taught me so much about what it means to them to grieve and to go through loss. My teachers who shared with me about animal-assisted therapy, who taught me about play therapy, who taught me about trauma, who taught me about being vulnerable, all of those people. And I also want to acknowledge all of the people in our community and in our country that are hurting right now. And just the devastation of the pain that we feel for them. And I just want to hold some space for them. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to light a candle, and then I thought we would invite people, if they wish, to just participate in a little reflective activity as we talk, because that's a way of kind of containing some of the stuff that might come up for us too.
Okay.
So I'm going to light the candle. We'll take a breath, because I want to breathe first, and then we'll maybe do a little processing, if that's okay.
Yeah, you shared as well that article that I'll share with the online after our talk about grief and breathing in your lungs. So
yes,
the breathing is
and that's also why I want to breathe, to pause and breathe as we process, because I don't know if I can put this somewhere that people can actually see it. Maybe if I put it here. One second, Jody.
that would actually work perfectly, Deanne.
My camera's position right now is quite precarious, so I hope it doesn't collapse on me.
If it does, we'll survive it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
To acknowledge the impact this has on our body, that we're holding a lot of tension, we're holding a lot of breath. So I would just like to pause before we continue forward, and to just practice taking a deep breath and creating some room and space there for us. Yeah.
I hear drinking.
That's not me. That's one of my fur children. She's hydrating.
I just wanted to notice or share with you that how impactful breathing is when you notice, when you focus on the air in your lungs, it really brings you into your body.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's power in that.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we can do in small doses throughout the day when we feel able to, because there's times when we don't feel able to be in our bodies right now. But in those moments where we can just pause and pause together with people, or pause with a pet, or pause with something that helps you feel grounded, and just practice being gentle and letting some air in. So I brought a couple pieces of paper, and one of the things I thought it might be interesting for us to do is to have a conversation, because you and I are going to have a conversation about grief, but I thought it would be an interesting activity to give a container to our grief. So I like circles, right? They can be lots of things. It could be a bowl, it could be a pie, it could be whatever you need it to be. So for me, this is the container, and in the container is where I want to put the grief. Okay, and I want you to be mindful of where you're at, and not to go too far, and not to feel like you have to share things that are too much. This is just something that can be reflective for yourself. And then around the container, I want to notice our resources. I want to notice things that are helpful to us, that support what's happening within the container of grief.
So that doesn't have to be a professional resource. It could be your pet or a family friend or whatever.
Gardening, painting, walking, whatever it is to you that is a resource to you as you hold all of this in the container, right? Is where do you find that moment to breathe, right? So I want to just take time to acknowledge both, right? And they'll probably look pretty different. And one may be easier or one may be a struggle. But I think it's important for us just to pause, right? While we breathe, is to pause and reflect. Make sense?
Yeah, so if I look down or you look down, we talked about this too before when we got ready for the show. For the listeners, we're also going to be participating in this.
Yeah.
So if we look down, that's why.
Yeah. And there's no right or wrong way to do this. You can put whatever you want in the circle. You can put imagery, you can put words, you can put whatever fits for you. And again, this can be a very private thing. It doesn't have to be something that you share. So Jody, why don't we kind of do both? Why don't we process and talk at the same time? We were talking.
I don't know if I can do that, but I'll try.
Okay. Well, I don't know how good I'm going to be able to do it, but let's give it a go. I really am thinking about the collective grief experience. And one of the things I think we talked about last time, I remember reading, was that, that we're all in the same boat, but we're all experiencing different storms.
COVID is what we're sharing, but there's a lot of other things going on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. And everybody's circle looks different. Mm-hmm. Right. And we don't necessarily know what the other person's walking with and what they're coping with at that time too. Right. So I think that's where we want to be cautious about comparing grief or judging grief, our own as well, because I think that we can be pretty harsh about, statements that we'll say to ourselves about our feelings about our own grief.
Definitely.
Right?
Because we're not, our culture isn't such that we really have a lot of skills around that.
I think we're working on it. My hope is we're working on it. But yeah, I think it's a difficult topic, yet it's the one that we all share universally. We're all going to experience grief.
And one of the things that I realized preparing for the show is that I think I tend to be a typical average Canadian person, and I associate grief with death, which we're all also experiencing right now. But grief isn't just about death. It's about a lot of other things. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it's about the day-to-day stuff that we're missing, right? Mm-hmm. Our routines, our patterns, our familiar. It's about being physically present with others. It's about a sense of security, a sense of predictability. All of those things that are kind of in limbo right now.
I think you're going to talk about living loss later on in the show.
Yeah, well, living loss is what we're all experiencing, right? Yeah. The cancellations of things that are important to each of us, mm-hmm. right? The cancellations of celebrations and of funerals, right? I know people are doing their best to do those virtually as well, but I think there's something, we're all missing that opportunity to gather and share. You know, when somebody dies and loses somebody traumatically, we want to hold them, we want to hug them, we want to comfort them, we want to be present,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's that ache for physical connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think we also talked about anticipatory grief, right? That we're trying, we're looking ahead, and our anxiety sometimes can feed into that too, of the what ifs, and feeling very overwhelmed by not having information about things like timelines and the severity, and what will this look like for us. Yeah.
And it can be, again, I'm already judging myself before the words even came out of my mouth. It can be whether school comes back in summer, whether being focused on my family, will my kids have summer jobs? Will I have to put up with angry teenagers all summer?
Yeah.
And then, of course, from there, there's a lot more bigger, important things. Like there's a lot.
Yeah, and it's ripples. I think about the waves of it, right? And that ripple, there's what's happening for you as an individual, there's what's happening for you as a mother, there's what's happening for you, as a wife, as a community member, as a business owner, like all these ripples, right? And each of us is experiencing different ripples.
Mm-hmm.
And each of us has different resources or lack of resources. Right? And that's where I think we get in. That's, a part that I'm really struggling with is the traumatic grief that I know people are going through, and the unsafe situations that I know people are in, and the highly toxic, stressful situations that people are in, and just feeling that's where I have to put a container around that one and hold space for it, but also acknowledge that spending a lot of time in that fear place isn't very helpful. And how can I be helpful around that? What can I do? How can I serve? Right.
And, most of our audience today will be from our region, but we haven't even experienced what they've experienced in China and Italy and US in terms of huge numbers of people in our community dying as well. Mm-hmm. So I can't even speak to that.
Yeah.
That's another piece that some of our listeners might be experiencing, and the frontline workers, of course, and all that they are seeing it, experiencing it, and they're putting themselves at risk. So there's that piece too. Mm-hmm. All goes in the circle. Yeah. Right?
Absolutely. That's exactly it, right? Exactly it. There's trauma happening at the same time as the grief, right? Yeah. Yeah. And the impact on our mental health, right?
Well, we'll have to do a show on trauma, and that has been our intention, because I know that word has come up, particularly about all the people impacted with this tragedy in Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. So we won't dig into it today, but we'll do that soon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I think I said to you in one of our correspondence that, trauma and grief are often holding hands, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the other things that you and I talked about, and this might be some of the stuff that goes in the circle for people, is the physiological impact of grief, right? The way the body experiences it, how it shows up in the brain, how it shows up in our thoughts, right?
It's a bit of a theme of all of our shows is when we talk about feelings and emotions or mental wellness, there's a tendency to think about it all up here, but it's your entire body. I need to be reminded of that constantly. So when you pay attention, you're right. Grief right now for me is my entire body. Yeah. When I notice it.
Yeah. And there's a lot of sensory stuff around grief, right? And there's a lot of sensory stuff around memories as well.
Okay, you know what? Let's talk about that. We talked a little bit preparing for this about the grief we're all experiencing can awaken pre-existing trauma, grief. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So, well, partly how I kind of simply explained it to you is I think about grief and trauma like dominoes, right? And we may have different numbers of dominoes or experiences of dominoes, but those kind of they stand up. And when somebody's had multiple grief or multiple traumas in their life, when they have another one, that domino tips down and kind of knocks the other ones down again too. And that's kind of that physiological reawakening that happens too, of the sensory piece of trauma or grief, right? Is that, what happens in the body and how that, impacts us. And so, yeah, very much. And that also, plays into vulnerability and resilience, and that's part of the conversation we'll have around trauma as well. Is that, you know, somebody who's had a really difficult developmental beginning early in life is going to have a higher degree of vulnerability to the stressors and to the grief and to the trauma that's currently happening. Right? Their resources on this part are going to look very different than somebody who had, you know, that kind of safe early
Supportive, yeah.
right brain development too, right, that was wired up in a way that they were developing resilience because they had that ability to develop resilience through relationship, right? But if there's been a deficit of relationship or there's been ongoing toxic stress, there's going to be a much higher degree of vulnerability for current situations as well.
So there's another show too, because what I hear you saying is that I'm familiar with attachment issues. A lot of people aren't. We can talk about that. But what you're saying is that even if you have available to you the same supports that maybe other people do, they don't work, or you can't benefit from utilizing some of them because there's too much going on inside that disallows you to do that, or your brain works differently.
Yeah.
Right.
And often there is a lack of resources for people who've had, you know, really, I mean, or resources are triaging the current situation in attempting to keep them alive, right?
Right.
Yeah. So that again goes back to that quote of that we're all in the same boat, but it's a different storm, right? It's a complete hurricane if you've had developmental trauma or a lack of relational supports, you know, early in life, right?
What about, can you draw a parallel to what our culture has taught most of us to do, which is just to stuff down all the sadness and grief, whether you have trauma or not, your entire life. And I find that whether it was, you know, I actually lived in Montreal during the Polytechnic massacre or the Humboldt, horrendous Humboldt accident. That's when it all comes out. Yeah, because we're overwhelmed, right? We're overwhelmed. And we haven't processed it.
Yeah, and that's often when you know, we would go into fight, flight, or freeze, right? We're kind of in that survival piece.
What does that look like?
It looks different for every person, right?
Yeah.
And that depends again on your early life experiences and where you're at currently with capacity in terms of how many stressors are happening for you. Right.
So it could be sadness, but it could also be, I guess, anger or self-destructive behaviors or a whole bunch of things. Okay.
Yeah. And that's what grief can look like too, right? Grief can look like the reoccurrence of coping strategies that we used to engage in, right? And that's kind of part of that dominoes too, is that things that we maybe used in the past as coping resources that might have become maladaptive, and we've kind of grown through that, they might resurface again, right? We might go, why am I doing this again? I haven't done this for years. Like, why am I feeling the pull in this direction? Or why am I wanting to access that unhealthy coping strategy? Right?
Why am I eating so much? Why am I drinking so much? Why am I...
We're trying to regulate.
Yep. Oh, you froze for a second. I'm going to wait for you to catch up before we carry on. Hopefully you'll come back online. And if not, we'll have to pop off and pop back on. Can you hear me, Deanne? Maybe.
Sorry.
Okay, you're
Little
back.
glitch.
Yep, it's okay.
Technical glitch.
No problem.
I got a puppy coming back over.
Oh, good. My notes say in this section we were going to maybe talk about crying, because that's one of the ways it comes out. That's one of the ways I've noticed. I've been crying like crazy all week.
Yeah.
And it's scary. And a little, I think it's not only scary, our culture, we're a little embarrassed to cry and to be that vulnerable and to show weakness. And when I was talking to somebody yesterday, they said, it's so crazy, like it's just coming out and I feel like I'm afraid it won't stop. And this is something you've heard many times. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, what do you find scary about it?
I can speak from my own experience, working on grief after my mother died. You go into the counselor's office, let's say, and you start talking and you just cry and it comes out. And I'm afraid it's not going to stop. I feel like I'm going to lose control of myself. And I feel like I'm not going to be able to stop if I let it come out, if I let the, breach the dam.
Yeah. Yeah. Did that ever happen for you? Did you ever feel that you were overwhelmed by it?
Well, I'm not still crying. I did stop.
I don't know that the goal is to stop. I think the goal is to not feel overwhelmed by it and to accept that it's part of the process for me. Right? Like you said, I think we've received messages about stuffing it down or denying it, or all those tricky things we hear growing up about feelings and expression of feelings. But what we know about the chemical release that comes with crying is that all of that stuff needs to come out of us as part of the grieving process, right? And the chemicals that are released through grief tears are different than the chemicals that are released through joy tears. So we need to let that flow. Otherwise, that, I want to call it toxic stuff, becomes part of the holding that happens in our bodies. And what was that thing that it says our tissue shows our issues, or something we were reading in that article? We both kind of like that, right? Is our issues show up in our tissues or something?
Yeah.
And
I'm going to grab it because
just that holding.
Our tissues hold our issues.
Yeah. Right. It shows up long term. It shows up long term in our health. It shows up long term in our bodies.
And I think those toxins that you were referring to, that's not new age. That's science. That's physiology.
You can look at those on a slide, and you can see the different ways that tears look, right? Yeah.
Crazy.
I think the other thing we need to do is to find a container for that fear around the loss of control if I let the tears out. And to find a way that feels doable. Like, some people find it very helpful to go to a therapist and to let it out there. Some people find it helpful to do it in the shower because they just want to, they do what works for them.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure.
Some people might run to the point of exhaustion and then let the tears come. Often with children, we'll see kind of like an angry outburst, or they'll be really struggling and having just really a hard time. And then there's this burst of the sadness is now here.
Yes. All the time.
Right?
Yes.
I don't know if you got it. I sent you another little image today, and it was exactly that. It was kind of right, and all the layers coming off, and underneath there was a hurt child.
I'll share that too afterwards.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful image, right?
It is.
Yeah.
It's triggering.
Yeah.
And I know with this, where you decide to let your grief come out, I actually have a spot that I post on my personal social media accounts that I visit often, and it's a tree up in the mountain that I hike to, and I've put scratched a little face into it. And not only do I say thanks to my teachers, my life teachers, but it's also where I grieve. And the people I grieve up there, the list is getting longer. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I go up there and it comes out. Yeah. And I do it. Yeah. So interesting. I didn't even reflect on that until you said that. People do it differently.
And it's an active process.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I hear from a lot of people, and my own experience is the same, is that grief needs an outlet, a physical outlet, right? Whether that's hiking, whatever it is for you, what gardening, building something, breaking something, whatever that is for you, is to give your body some sort of outlet. Yeah.
The other point we were going to talk about at this stage was, if we don't grieve now, when will we grieve? There's some grieving we can do now, and there's some community grieving that is really tough to do right now.
Yeah. And I think we need to do both, right? We need to know that when we can gather again is how will we grieve as a community, and what will that look like? But we can continue the conversation now, and we can open it up to, how do other people grieve? What in their cultures, in their families, in their communities? How do they come together under such tremendous times of loss? I mean, we're only speaking from our own experience and from what other people have taught us. And I find tremendous value in learning how other cultures express their grief, because it gives me the opportunity to explore more for myself of how do I stay connected with those that I've lost, right? And whether that's hiking to a special place and crying, or that's having a conversation, or writing a letter, or planting a flower, or whatever it is that speaks to you, getting a tattoo. Lots of people do memorial tattoos. Whatever it is that speaks to you, that you can maintain that connection of relationship. And I talk about doing that in a way that's less painful, right? Is how do I stay connected to that person that I'm missing so badly, in a way that just is slightly different than the pain of the loss, right? And that we all have to discover that for ourselves.
And you use expressive therapies to do that often. So the arts, music, drawing, dancing, any of that is very powerful way to get emotions out.
Yeah. And often we naturally just go there ourselves, right? When we're grieving, right? Is we might just go back to knitting again, or back to something that was very patterned and repetitious that gave us a sense of calm, right?
The coloring, you used that last show.
Coloring, right?
Mm-hmm.
Coloring is huge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know gardening is big right now. There's lineups at Art Naps in the morning.
Yeah.
When I come in, people are digging and getting in the flow of that.
And how wonderful gardening is for the cycle of life, right? And with children, right? The seasons of a garden are very similar to the seasons of a lifespan, right? Or to, periods of growth and periods of rest. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for metaphor and for discussion about life and death, right?
Yeah, and we're already talking on our plans of how to do a show just about kids and grief. Mm-hmm. So that's coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That'll be very interesting.
Yeah. And kids are brilliant at grieving. I mean, we'll talk about that more later. But what I will say, the wisdom that I get from children in grief is that they take breaks from it. Right? So they'll be crying, they'll be grieving, they'll be expressing their sorrow, and then, oh, I need a snack. And then they're having a snack, and then they have all this energy to run off, and they're out, doing something really active, right? And then they have a nap, and then they might have a snack again, and then they might, come back and do another piece of the grieving. But they do it in smaller doses, and there's often a lot of activity and just kind of that self-nurturing, because that's part of their development and hopefully where they're at in terms of their own nurturing, right? Of napping more, right? Doing simple play, right? And those are all things that benefit grown-ups too.
Yeah. Super interesting, because the way my therapist talked about it was dipping your toe in your grief and dipping your toe out. You go in for a bit, you feel, you process, but then you take a break. And that's what kids do all naturally.
They do it all the time. They're natural. They just know how to do it. Yeah. One of the ways I talk about grief with people too, and around that thought of like, if I start crying, I can't stop, I'll circle back to that, is I talk about a balloon that's really full of air. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think the fear is that you're going to come into my office, or you're going to have a conversation with a friend, and the balloon is just going to fly out of control because you let it go. And that's that, I won't be able to contain it. I'll just be so overwhelmed. And I say, it's not pleasant, but really what we want to do is let it out in that really squeaky fashion that's super irritating. And it might be, like it's kind of yucky, but I want you to feel in control of that. So you don't feel flooded, you don't feel overwhelmed, but that we are letting that pressure, that out, and we're exploring it, and we're holding space for it.
You just said, whether you're talking to your therapist or you're talking to a friend, there's a lot of ways to get support that's outside of therapy.
Oh, for sure.
But when we spoke earlier today, you also talked about healthy boundaries around sharing your grief with other people. Mm-hmm. Maybe we should talk a little bit about that.
I think it's super cool to teach our important people and each other how we check out if they have capacity right now to hold some of our stuff or to hear some of our stuff. Mm-hmm. I think that's a good way to say it, right? So, in my practice as a therapist, if I've had a really heavy experience and I need to clear that, I need to process that in some way, I might go to a colleague and I say, hey, do you have a minute? Can I share something that was impactful, or can I process something that was impactful? But I ask permission first. I don't just go, blah.
It's like asking someone if they have time for a talk right now, or it's like, it's polite.
Yeah.
And it's also giving them the chance to say, I'm not in the place to do that right now.
Yeah.
So
and I really want to be there for my people, but I do know I have a certain capacity, and when I've reached that capacity, I don't feel that useful and I don't feel that present. So I'd rather set a boundary and say, Jody, I can totally hear you got stuff. Is there any chance we could set a time tomorrow first thing when I'm fresh so that I can be there for you?
Yeah, and it's okay to be the person saying that.
It's imperative to be the person saying that, because we have to take care of ourselves as well.
The oxygen mask again.
Yeah. And sometimes there's a person in the family system or in the work system that is that person. It's the person people go to. Well, we have to recognize they have capacity and needs as well, right? So I think just that asking permission, right? Checking in with people. I do a lot of checking in. Like I'll say, how's your heart? How's your brain? Right? You know, and they decide where they go with that. Right? They say my heart's really heavy. I say, well, scale of 1 to 10, how heavy is it today? Right? And then they decide where to go with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the other thing that I just want to touch on, fear, because that's one of the things I put in my circle. I think we as family members or as friends or are experiencing people going through grief is sometimes I hear a lot of, I don't know what to say, I don't know what to do. So, you know, they just kind of feel helpless, right? Or sometimes there's fear of like, I don't know what to ask them because what if I make them cry?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's so important that we get comfortable checking in with people and we get comfortable having a language around death and loss and the loss of life, not, you know, not just physical life. But, you know, developing language and dialogue with each other around that.
And it's really hard. I find it harder for people you've known a long time that you have never done that with than someone newish.
Yeah.
Like I even think about my husband. It's not easy or natural for me to go there with him. I usually seek support for that specific thing outside of that because we're not used to doing that. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's because I don't want him to be in pain too. I don't know. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But interesting.
Yeah. And I think that's where we can ask each other what would be helpful, right? How would you like me to check in? Is it okay if I check in?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
You know,
and I've also noticed that I actually have been purposely not having certain conversations with my teenagers right now. Mm-hmm. Thinking that they've got so much on their plate already. Mm-hmm. For example, I didn't share the story of the connection with the Nova Scotia mm-hmm. tragedy with them at all because mm-hmm. I just thought, so I think you're talking about who's that person in your family that tends to do that or your friend who tends to be the supporter. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of the time it's in a traditional family, it's the woman or the mother mm-hmm. figure. Mm-hmm. And so I have noticed with all my friends that most of us have taken on that role right now. Mm-hmm. And I can speak for myself. I have no idea how to do this other than what I've been doing for 20 years with them.
Yeah.
No specific skills.
Those are the skills, right?
Right. Checking in and being there and letting them.
Being available.
Yeah. Seek support from you. Yeah.
Being attuned, right? Being present. Mm-hmm. Present, attuned, and attentive.
Present, attuned, and attentive.
Right.
And what about men? We didn't prepare for that conversation, but this is particularly tough for men to grieve.
It can be,
and
for sure.
to ask for support.
It can be, yeah. I see shifts in that, and it excites me. I see, you know, I see young men accessing, you know, services and coming in and talking about, you know, grief and loss, and that's super exciting. I definitely am excited to see and to be taught in how to be helpful in supporting people to find community around grief, whether that's gender community or, you know, age community or, you know, whatever that might be, is finding your way to have a connection to community around grief. You know, I heard, and I would love to know more if anybody knows about this in Kelowna, I heard there's a walking grief group, which, yes, that's a fabulous idea, is to include walking and the opportunity to connect and to just share. And, you know, I would imagine you don't have to share if you don't want to, but just the opportunity to collectively walk with people who understand a bit about what you might be going through can be tremendously supportive.
Yeah, and that would be like any other group, support group.
Yeah. I told you about our grief group for children who've lost a parent to death. And we just had a virtual grief group on Saturday. And it was really cool. It was really cool to connect with them, and we did some drawing together, and we were able to share things and to, you know, to just connect again. And I'd love to see more of that happening, or to hear if it is happening. I want to know about it.
Okay.
Because I'd love to support that. Right? How are people collectively grieving, and how do we want to see that change and shift and grow when we can gather again in person. Mm-hmm. Right.
So, ambiguous loss.
tricky
and
one,
living
right?
loss.
You know, the lack of clarity that we're all experiencing right now, really, really hard, right? Because we don't have, you know, we're all kind of waiting, right? We're all kind of in this limbo place, and that limbo place has different impact for all of us depending on, you know, where we're at too, right?
So ambiguous loss means just like the literal translation of it, that
Yeah.
you're experiencing grief, but you don't even know how to define it.
Yeah, or the sense of like other losses connected to it too, right? Like the sense of loss of safety, right? Or the loss of kind of or financial security, jobs, right? Like all of those extra layers around this that we may have information on or we may not, right? And then again, not having information about timeframes, right? It's and ambiguous is like that living loss part, right? It's the multiple ripples that we're experiencing too.
So let's define living loss then, for us people that don't live in this world. I don't have the literacy around this. So.
I think, to be honest, loss is part of living. And if we acknowledge that, it might not be so tricky to navigate. Living loss is ongoing, right? Living loss for children can be an absent parent. Can be an absent parent, right? So that parent might not be dead, but they're not available. So there's this ongoing grieving of that absent parent. For a parent who's lost a child, same thing, right? There's that ongoing, or a family that has a rupture in relationship and has no connection, a disconnect, grieving that ongoing loss of I have no idea if they have children or not, or if they've gotten married, you know, that kind of thing, right?
Gotcha. So loss, oh, you're frozen again. Hopefully you'll be back soon. There you are.
Why that's happening.
This
I'm
is why
running out
I'm
of
here
battery when I'm plugged in.
I can't be at home because that happens to me as well with 4 people streaming. So then we've talked about ambiguous loss, living loss, anticipatory grief. I know you wanted to invest in some significant time with signs of grief and then what to do with your grief.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Why don't we talk about signs?
Okay. Well, we're probably all experiencing trouble focusing, right, and holding information. I think that you know, grief brain, I often call it that, right, where we can't concentrate, we can't make decisions. Focus is really hard. Writing lists can be really helpful. A lot of struggles around mood, right? People can feel really angry and irritable. We can feel, you know, fatigue or no energy, headache, stomach ache. So it'll show up in the body, right? Show up in our energy and that kind of thing. We might notice, like you said earlier, about changes in eating, drinking, shopping, that kind of stuff, where we might be trying to kind of soothe it, things like that. We might do avoiding behaviors, right? Where we're not looking at any information, or we're kind of like trying to keep all of what's happening out there. That kind of stuff.
Pain is one.
Oh yeah, pain goes way up for people, right? Because you just think of the tension and all of the activation in the body and stuff like that. Yeah. Jody, I'm going to move to another plugin because I think the problem is my thing's not charging. So I'm going to unplug. I'll be like 30 seconds, okay?
I wish I had some kind of skill that I could entertain the audience with, but I got nothing.
I think I'm still here. I just got to find a plug that's actually going to work.
Okay. Hopefully you don't have something embarrassing in the background.
I was going to say, you get to see more of my messy house.
Mine's atrocious, but
I'll let you see my nice artwork that I found at the thrift store.
very nice. That's actually very happy art.
I know, right?
Yeah.
Birds.
Makes me feel
happy
happy.
Birds. Okay, so we talked a little bit about signs of grief, and that will look, you know, different when we talk about children, right? That shows up different, similar but different for them too, and for teens, right? And especially with all of our sleep schedules being slightly off, you might notice, you know, more emotional kind of dysregulation, more frustration and anger, because they feel a loss of control too, right?
Mm-hmm. I've noticed a ton of that, and it's the roller coaster. They're not little kids that do what you described earlier, but they're not as in control of their outbursts. So there's kind of like a halfway in between.
Yes. Yeah. And often our expectations of them are maybe incongruent with where their capacity's at too, right?
I have to keep reminding me and my husband about that.
Yeah.
That they're under a lot of pressure too.
Yeah. And I think we want to embrace the fact that we're all under diminished capacity right now. Right, we're all raw, and those that are going through more are experiencing more rawness and more vulnerability, right? And so those of us that can, we need to step forward and we need to be that gentle place that holds space, and we need to be available and attuned to them, because it is waves, right?
That's good. We haven't even talked about that yet. And that was a big helpful thing for me with grief, is the whole idea that grief never goes away, it just changes. And the waves become less frequent and less big.
Yeah.
And they catch you at weird, unexpected times.
Yes.
Out of the blue.
There's this really good drawing that I'll see if I can find and send it to you, but it's a box, and inside of that box is a tiny button on a wall. So imagine it's like a four-sided room with a tiny button. And in the beginning, grief is a ball that is so big, it just is always hitting that button, right? So it's like the pain button, the grief button. There's nowhere that ball can move that it doesn't hit the button.
Okay.
But over time, what happens is that ball does get smaller. The button's still there, and the ball might be smaller and jumping around a lot more, but it is going to hit that button every now and again, right? It's going to revisit it. But it's not the constant big ball hitting the button every moment of the day, right? So I like that. I like that kind of imagery too, for
I do. That's helpful.
how it shifts over time. And then that ball can expand again too, right? I think a lot of the grief size right now is much bigger for people.
And that directly speaks to what you said at the beginning of our conversation, which is now that we're experiencing expanded balls because of all the additional stress right now. It feels a lot like it did when we had grief about something else beforehand.
Oh.
It's the same feeling, and it's come back, and it's strong again, and it's more frequent again.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we want to do what we can to help our body with that feeling. Right? We want to do soothing things. We want to do sensory rich things. We want to do regulating things. We want to do movement things, meditation things, anything that for us that creates opportunity to just pause and to be still, or to feel nurtured.
So how about the whole idea about, we talked about this with Ed Weiss earlier this week on a different show, about constantly distracting ourselves during this time, and what that's one thing a lot of people are doing, I think, is they're distracting themselves, because it's really hard to feel the way we're feeling right now.
Yep.
And what is the downside of that if we don't take that time, take that space, and make that quiet container, right?
Well, I think the downside could look different for different people, right? There could be, delayed grief, right? Where we cope, right? We get through, but then after a period of time, we just kind of crash because we just, we sustained ourselves as long as we could, and then there was nothing else to draw on, right? I think when we're using coping strategies that have the potential to be maladaptive, is we want to be really cautious that we're not going to end up with something else on our plate that we're going to have to deal with after this experience, right?
What do you
things like alcohol, right? Things like food, things like sugar, anything that we tend to kind of, be drawn to as a regulation tool. Like some people really like salty things, some people like sweet things, is we just want to be cautious about the amount of that. I'm not saying don't have it, because Lord knows we're having it, but in doses, right? So, okay, I'm going to go for a walk before I have that sugar, or before I have that thing that might make me feel numb from my feelings. And then if I still want to have it, I'll have it after the walk, right?
And just talk to the first part of that is you're saying that can create another bad outcome. So you overeat, if that's what you do to soothe yourself, and then you end up having problems related to your weight gain.
And then you have all the thoughts and feelings that you have about overeating or weight gain or drinking, or, and then we build in, this really kind of horrible judgment, difficult loop of self-criticism, right?
Plus the grief is still there because we haven't processed it.
Yeah, we're just feeling, really lousy all around at that point.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, again, like we talked about last time, just in terms of supporting our brains through these experiences, is our brain support interventions and things we do to take care of ourselves don't have to be tricky or complicated. They can be, simple, small dose things that help shore us up under times of stress.
So let's go through those again. You said it can be whatever works for you.
Yeah. Right? For lots of us, a warm bath or a shower or something in nature, walking, gardening, knitting, something that has some pattern and repetition to it. Having your hair brushed, if you really like that kind of sensory experience. I was just thinking about brushing my dogs. Anything that has pattern and repetition, even like with kids, like with teens, because often it can be hard to connect or find time to chat. If you have the opportunity to be near a basketball court, is to just take a basketball and play the game 21, right? Just do shots together because it has pattern and repetition to it, and it's really regulating because you're doing the dribbling and you're doing the shooting and there's all this pattern happening. And what I find is that's often where really cool conversations happen about things that we might not talk about otherwise. Right.
So why pattern and repetition? Why does that
brains love it?
Feel good.
It's regulating. Like think back when your kids were young, you would rock them when they would be in distress, right? You would hold them and you would soothe them with motion, right? Rocking chairs, all of those things. If you have a rocking chair, get it back out. Spend some time in it. I have somebody here that is coming to say hi.
Oh my goodness.
She's chewing on my foot.
This is one of the things that works for me is my pets.
Yes.
So regulating.
Absolutely. And because we'll go out and walk them, right? We'll pet them, they're very, they're attuned to all of the stress as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you noticed it in Murphy? Because he's pretty.
It's very hard for him, right? His whole life, since he was 8 weeks old, his pattern has been to see, people in session and to have, he has his daily walk. He goes there, so his whole routine's out. It's an adjustment, right?
Even for our pets.
Yeah, for everything. All beings, right? All beings. Yeah.
So we're getting close to getting out of time. I think we've covered most of it. What do we do with our images? Mine's really not great.
Mine's over there. I got distracted by our conversation.
So this is fine.
I can see. Nice.
Is
there anything you want to share about it, Jody?
I think what I want to share is that I realize that I'm lucky that I know what makes me feel better and some of the strategies that I can use and I do use to feel better. And I still feel really rotten this week. And I feel very emotional and I feel really sad, even with all my support. So maybe that's okay too.
And I think that's exactly what you say to yourself. That's okay. I'm supposed to feel this way. Right? Whenever I hear people judging their grief or when they're, I hear words like should, I shouldn't. I say it makes sense. You feel this way, right? You're supposed to feel this way when you go through hard things and give ourselves permission. Yes, it sucks. Yes, you don't want to be here. Yes, it's painful, but it also speaks to the level of importance that that person or that thing has in your life. And we don't want to dishonor that or discount that level of significance to people.
And I think we're so programmed when we're trying to support others from we're coming from the right place, but we're trying to make people feel better all the time. Oh, if someone dies, for example, well, they're in a better place now.
Yeah. They lived a good life. Like those are not helpful statements.
It's not helpful.
Those are not helpful statements. I'll bring back a little joy.
Hi, Gracie. Oh my gosh, maybe we should end on a joyful moment like that.
Yeah.
Look at how adorable she is.
Isn't she adorable?
Yeah.
And that is one of the things that I do because I hear hard things all day, all the time. I hear really difficult stories and sit with people in really painful places, is that I do take moments to remember and to really embrace the little bits of joy that we get. So.
And joy can be found in super easy things, hey?
Yeah. Joy can be found in going outside and noticing something that catches your eye that's pleasing, right? Joy can be found in noticing how cleansing it can feel to have a deep breath, right?
And that gratitude practice.
Totally.
Remembering that there's things to be thankful for, even in the darkest days.
Yeah, I agree.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today. I think we're going to cut it off there because it's close. And that's a lot to process. And it was very helpful.
And I just really encourage people to be gentle with themselves, right? And to create space and to create room for their grief. To take a few minutes every day to just let it have some space, right? Let a little bit of the air out.
Right?
Yeah. Let a little bit of the air out of the balloon.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thanks, Karen. Take good care of yourself.
Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to all of you watching.
Thanks for putting up with all the glitches too.
Oh, we've had a lot worse, believe me. Stay connected to us on thirdspacecanada.org, Facebook, Instagram, and this show will be up in a day or two on YouTube. So we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again, Deanne.
Take good care, everyone.
Take care.
Nothing left to give.